San Diegans accomplish great things every day. We care about our neighbors and our community. We are proud of our diversity. We are resilient. We hold our leaders accountable. We live in one of the most dynamic cities in America, the San Diego Union-Tribune, telling San Diego's story for more than 150 years.
Hello, I'm Dr. Gail F. Baker, Vice President and Provost at the University of San Diego.
And I'm Dr. Noelle Norton, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here at USD.
For the second year in a row, USD, along with its College of Arts and Sciences and Humanities Center, is proud to return as the presenting sponsor for the 2021 San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books.
As a university deeply committed to the liberal arts, USD promotes a form of lifelong learning that ignites curiosity, builds critical connections across different ideas and topics by seeing them from unique perspectives.
Our partnership with the Festival of Books enables all of us avid readers to come together as a community alongside renowned authors from all over the world and to dive deeply into imaginative stories and important themes.
Yes, books do have the ability to open minds and hearts. On behalf of the University of San Diego, we thank you for joining us for today's program to explore the world of books with us.
Enjoy the presentation.
To an artist, a blank canvas is the beginning of a magical work. To an interior designer, an empty room brings about those same emotions. Creating the perfect decor starts with your imagination, an idea, concept, or a dream. Woodbridge Interior's in-house design team work with you to make the most inviting and functional home you've always dreamed of, full of comfort and beauty. Woodbridge Interior's Design Center and Room Planner help bring your visions to life.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books. I'm John Wilkens, a reporter at the Union-Tribune. I'm honored to be speaking with Michael Connelly, the best-selling author of 36 books, including The Law of Innocence, which came out in paperback earlier this year and features two of his best-known characters, defense lawyer Mickey Haller and Detective Harry Bosch. Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to join us at the Festival of Books.
Glad to be here.
So let's start by talking about Law of Innocence, your most recent book. How do you know when it's time to write a Harry Bosch novel or time to write a Mickey Haller one, or in this case, a little bit of both?
It's different all the time. I pretty much just kind of fly by instinct.
Okay.
Some of these characters I really feel attached to, and sometimes I miss them. Mostly Mickey Haller. I write about Harry Bosch quite a bit. So I can't say I've ever been in a position where I missed him, but every now and then I feel like checking in on Mickey Haller and creating a story that's solely around him or bringing Bosch into a story and that kind of thing.
Right.
And then sometimes I feel like I should lay off all of them and come up with something new. Doesn't happen too often, but like last year I returned to a reporter named Jack McAvoy, who I had not written about in, I think, 9 or 10 years. And, something was speaking to me back then about the media and wanting to check in and see how he's faring in, the era of fake news and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes these outside kind of forces, what's going on in the world, affect what I write.
Right. Well, does that help keep it fresh for you? The fact that you have several different characters you can return to and bring to the front and let some others sit in the background for a while?
I hope it does. I mean, I'm a big believer in that what happens in the writing process is what happens in the reading process. And so, yes, that's the right word, fresh, keeping it fresh, keeping myself plugged in and interested. I think that might translate into the reader feeling that way. I just finished a book. Actually, I was doing the copy editing of it today that will come out later this year. And I chose to write about Renee Ballard, who's a detective with the LAPD. She's like the last character I write about that's still in a police department. And, after the year we've had, with George Floyd, pandemic, all that stuff. To me, it's an interesting story to talk about what it's like to be a cop. I know she's a detective. She's not a street cop, but still, I wanted to write about how policing has changed pretty dramatically in the last year.
Oh, so you want to tell us a little bit about the plot of that one? That's a Renee Ballard one, and I guess Harry Bosch will probably show up as well.
Yeah, he shows up a little bit. It's called The Dark Hours because she works the midnight shift. And it's got a lot of things going on because as the midnight shift detective, it's a catch-all. You kind of roll out on almost anything that happens. And so a couple of the cases have strings and she gets pulled out. It starts on New Year's Eve of this past New Year's Eve where someone is shot during a New Year's Eve party and killed. And so she catches a murder case. It's basically the first murder of the year in Los Angeles that she's working. But we also come into the story in the middle of a serial sexual assault case where someone is attacking women in Hollywood, and she's well into that investigation, and that picks it up as well. And these are the basic plot lines, but it's really about I think the police department and my reporting of it. I know I write fiction, but I spend time with real cops and so forth, and I do some reportage in my research, and it's a different department in the last 9 months. And it's gone from being proactive to reactive. And you talk about defunding the police. You don't have to worry about that with LAPD. They kind of defunded themselves by running out of budget during all the protests. And so lots of units have been disbanded. Not a lot is going on. And you got this character, Ballard, who's always been pretty fierce and pretty relentless in what she's doing. And she's now in a department that's kind of stuck in lethargy and lack of interest in serving the public. And that, I think that's accurate to what's going on. And that's not good for the community in real life, but in fiction, that's great obstacles. That's stuff she has to get around to do her job. And so it's a way of defining character.
Oh. Well, talk to me a little bit about Renee Ballard, because as I understand it, she's, unlike many of your other characters, she's actually based on a real person.
Yeah, I would say that all my characters have been composites of, I think I haven't done it in 25 years, but I think I'm still a reporter at heart. And so I've taken from people that I've known as a reporter and after, but, I've taken the things I need. But Ballard really kind of came to me through one detective who did her work. And it was a homicide detective at the LAPD. She still is. And she'd been helping me with my Harry Bosch books. But in the course of that relationship, she talked about how she first broke into the detective ranks by volunteering for this job no one wants. And that's working the midnight shift, or the late show, as they called it, in Hollywood. And she just, the thing I already told you, the idea that this detective rolls out on everything, from missing persons to murder to robbery, to assault, anything that happens in the middle of the night, that really hit me as a guy who had been writing homicide stories over and over again for 20 plus years. I thought, well, here's a detective that I can use to, cover the waterfront, do whatever I want. And so that's how Renee Ballard was born.
So what are the challenges for you as a man writing a book that features a woman?
It might be an issue if I did not have this real detective. Her name's Mitzi Roberts. Right now, she's in charge of the cold case squad for the LAPD. And if I ever run into one of these gender type issues, I send her a text, or I give her a call, or I take her out to breakfast and walk through it. So I have someone who's had this exact experience there to help me through stuff. And she really does. She vets my books. I send them to her. She comes back with, the procedural stuff, but she also says, this is what I would do, or this is what I would say. And, that kind of verisimilitude is just gold, so I never say, well, I don't want to do that. I want to do this. I usually take everything she says as gospel and put it into the book.
Right. Well, now you mentioned a few minutes ago the bringing the character forward. And I know you're a writer who's always been interested in character as a driver of your stories, at least as important, if not maybe more important than plot sometimes. So how did you arrive at that perspective, and has it changed at all over the years?
I think it was the base I have from being a newspaper reporter. I wanted to, back when I was a teenager, I wanted to write. I wanted to be a novelist, and particularly a crime novelist. And, putting my head together with my parents and telling them this, they thought the best way to get a shot at this, and it is a long shot, is why don't you get a press pass, go to journalism school, get the thing that will get you into police stations and courtrooms and detective bureaus, and hopefully it prepares you to take that shot. And so I was very well aware of this. And so when I was, when I reached the point after, several years of being a reporter, I said, I think I'm ready to do this or to take a shot at it. I really thought about what do I have that most other writers out there in the genre don't have? And it's like, I have this access. So rather than writing about a private eye, I wrote about a police detective, because I was talking to literally 100 or so police detectives a week as a reporter. And so from that came this idea of taking what I had, and that's access to the real way they do stuff, the verisimilitude. And I thought, if that could become a hallmark of what I'm doing, maybe I could build a career out of this. And essentially that's what happened. And I reached the point where I had to choose. I thought both jobs were kind of hurting because I had a foot in two camps, writing novels at night and being a police reporter during the day. And, so I went with what I'd hoped I'd attain way back when I was a teenager. And what was great was there was always a little bit of a separation when I was a reporter, and I'd be asking, real detectives for, asking them questions that were pertaining to what I was writing in fiction. Even still, they kind of held back because I was still that threat. I was this reporter. And once I stopped being a reporter, I was no longer this threat. A lot of these people I knew started opening up and telling me more about the life, what it takes and what it does to you. And it got more personal. At the same time, it's still accurate. These are people who do this job. And I think that was inspiring, but it also was very helpful in what I was doing. And so, 25 years since I was covering the LAPD as a reporter, I still feel I'm covering it in fiction. And I still have, several people who do that job helping me along the way. So
remind us, how many books into your fiction career were you when you finally made the clean break from doing the daily journalism?
I say 3.5 because I did 3 books and I was having to struggle. And so I asked for a 6 months, I guess you call it a sabbatical. I was working at the LA Times up in Los Angeles, and they gave me the 6 months. So I just wanted to see the quality, and you're always your largest critic is always yourself. Mm-hmm. Your most striving critic is always yourself. And so I thought, if I have 6 months where I'm only working on a novel, will I see a difference, and will it make it worth the risk of leaving, a weekly paycheck to do this? Because I was by no means an overnight success or anything. And that 6 months, I saw that I had to do it. I thought what became my 4th book was so much more accomplished than the 3 before it. So it wasn't a choice anymore. I just felt I had to do it. But when I got to 6 months, they said, you got to promise to come back, because we don't want you in 6 months to say, hey, I'm not coming back, when we've lost all this time to train someone and find someone to take your place. So I made good on my promise to go back, and lasted 5 more months. And man, they were long months. but I did give them a lot of notice, and I worked with someone who filled in, took my place when I left. So I felt like I didn't double cross them. Right. But I definitely knew the writing was on the wall when I came back.
Oh. So you mentioned wanting to be a crime novelist from a young age. Why don't you take us back to some of your earliest influences? I understand your mom was a crime fiction fan.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know why that is, but she loved reading crime novels and always seemed to have a book, a paperback in her purse or whatever, and would read whenever there was a moment to read. I mean, she had 6 kids, so she was busy a lot, and she also worked as a bank teller. But for her, a break was to read a few pages or a chapter of a crime novel, and I picked up some of them. She was mostly a like an Agatha Christie, I guess you'd call it soft-boiled crime, and that's where I started. But then I kind of branched out and found my own stuff, and the big 3 for me all wrote about Southern California, so they were Raymond Chandler, Joseph Wambaugh, and Ross McDonald. When I discovered their books at different times, that's where the formation of what I wanted to do came about.
Well, so Chandler in particular, Raymond Chandler, early influence. He was a writer with some ties to San Diego, as many of our watchers probably are aware. He's buried here. So what was it about his work in particular that inspired you?
Well, Joe Wambaugh lives down there too. So
he does now, yeah.
Somehow there's a connection to San Diego with these guys. I think because Chandler was, I just loved the artistic way he wrote. In other words, yeah, they were mysteries, they were private eye novels, but they were really a description of a place and a time and a character, and someone's kind of haunted view of life. And so that transcended the whodunit of the type of books that I was getting from my mother to something that I viewed as an art form, and making a statement about a time and a place, and about being an outsider, and that was a powerful thing when I'm in my teens, and my family moved a lot, so I kind of I changed schools a lot, so I became a reader myself, because that was kind of where I found shelter, and the connection to feeling like an outsider was extremely strong, and that's why I really connected to the Chandler books.
Do you have a favorite book of his for maybe people who aren't all that familiar with his work?
Yeah, I mean, it's not what is considered his. I mean, he only wrote, I think it was 7 novels, and I like them all, but I love The Little Sister because it has one chapter. It's either chapter 11 or chapter 13. It's a very short chapter, and it does not advance the plot at all. It has nothing to do with the plot. It's a frustrated Marlowe. That was the name of his character, Philip Marlowe, and he just wants to blow off steam, so he takes a drive. He gets in his car and kind of does this giant loop around Los Angeles. He goes up into the valley, then out into Malibu, and then back through the west side to Hollywood, where he lived. And it's just a 7, 8, 9-page, depending on the whatever size book you're reading. It's a short chapter, and it's just a description of Los Angeles at that time. And many of his wonderful phrases and writing really glow in that chapter. And what's great about it is, I came to Los Angeles in '87, and I read the book. I read that chapter. I don't read the whole book over and over, but I read that chapter at least once or twice a year for inspiration. And it's because a lot of the descriptions hold up. The book is like something like 80 years old now, a lot older than 80 years, I think. Right. And the writing still describes this place, and so it's transcended time. And again, that underlines that's art. If you can do something that transcends decades and decades, it's quite an accomplishment, and that's why it's so inspiring.
Oh, interesting. So, I understand at one point you lived in an apartment in LA where Chandler had lived. What was that like?
No, that's like it's kind of the wrong information that's on Wikipedia. I should correct it. So the way I discovered Chandler was back in 1974. I saw a movie. I was a freshman in college, and I saw a $1 movie night for a movie that had come out the year before called The Long Goodbye, which is based on the Chandler book. And I loved the movie. It starred Elliot Gould as Philip Marlowe. Mm-hmm. And that led me to read the book. There was a tie-in that showed Elliot Gould on the cover. I read that, and then I read the rest of his novels, and the rest is history. It really inspired me. But in the movie, Marlowe lived in this very distinctive apartment in Hollywood called the High Tower, and it's on the historic register. It's still there. It's right behind. The Hollywood Bowl goes up a hill, and this apartment is built into the other side of that hill. And so when I came out here, I grew up in Florida, and I came out here to work for the LA Times. And this was before you could Google Map and things like that. I had to kind of hunt around to find the Hightower apartments, but I found them. And I knocked on the manager's door, and I pointed to the unit that was Marlowe's in the movie, because it's kind of like this rounded thing on the side of the hill, has a balcony and stuff. It's very distinctive and pretty wonderful. And I said, is that for rent by any chance? And he said, no, but you're probably a writer. And he told me about how writers make this homage to this place, or this pilgrimage to this place. And it's being rented right now by a writer. But I gave him my LA Times business card and said, well, if it ever comes open, give me a call. And he called that number like 8 years later. I'd already left the Times. About 10 years later, I'd left the Times. And was now a full-time writer. And but the desk number went to someone who knew me. And so she took this call, and the guy was looking for me. He had an apartment for me. And she connected us, and the apartment had come open. So I rented it. I had a home, but I rented it as a writing studio, and I kept it for about 5 years. And it was mostly a romantic thing. It didn't even have air conditioning, so it was not the greatest writing room. You could write there at night when things cooled down. Parking was terrible, and anytime there was an event at the Hollywood Bowl, forget it. You couldn't even get near the place because of the traffic. So it had a lot of issues, but I loved having it, and eventually. And then when I was there, people would knock on the door, and it was writers. Writers would come in and say, hey, can I look at this place? It got rented. Some writers who knew about it and loved the movie, I actually made money off it by renting it out to as a film set a few times. And so it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that does sound interesting. So do you, speaking about influences, do you read other crime novelists when you're working on your own books?
It's hard, but you want to, you want to know what's going on out there. I'm like an old dog now, and you hear about who's new and who's turning heads and what you should read. So I can't say I'm a voracious reader like my mother made me early in my life. Definitely have slowed down on the reading, because most of the time I can write when most people would read, like on a plane or even in bed. So my reading is limited, but I have my ear to the ground, and people tell me stuff I should read, and I try to pick it up and get to it. I particularly about people writing about LA, since I write about LA. I'll try to read as much of that as I can get my hands on.
Right. Well, I'm sure some of our audience members are writers or would-be writers. So let's talk a little bit about your process. Do you listen to music while you write at all? I'm thinking about Bosch and the jazz music.
Yeah, right here I have a pretty good turntable set up.
Turntable? You're really dating yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I try to be like Bosch, and I'm not saying I'm an audiophile expert, but I went to someone and said, get me a really good set. And he did, and set up here. And so I spin some records when I'm writing. It's not all the time, but it is, especially when I write about Bosch, I feel that closeness to jazz music, and often play stuff. I always say that if you're reading one of my books and Bosch is listening to something, well, that's what I was listening to when I wrote that page. Because invariably whatever I'm listening to ends up in the books.
Right. So are you a writer who outlines your books in advance?
I would say no, but who knows? Maybe my first draft is just an amazingly detailed outline because it needs a lot of work, and my books really come together in the second draft. And most often my second draft is shorter than my first because I'm just throwing everything in, and then I kind of sculpt out in the second draft what I need to say, what I can hold back, and to build intrigue and momentum and things like that. So, but I don't technically, write out a shorthand. This happens, then this happens, and this happens. I usually don't start writing a book till I have an idea of how it's going to begin, how it's going to begin, and how it's going to end. So I have A and Z, and then I just start writing, and so that I weave all over the place. I haven't written a book yet where I didn't make a wrong turn and have to throw out a lot of pages. But that's the way it goes. It's not that heartbreaking anymore after you've done as many as I have. And then, then I assess what I've got, and go back through it and really hopefully make it lean and mean and fast moving.
Yeah. So do the beginning and the ending pretty much stay the same though through that whole process, or do you sometimes go in a different final direction?
For the most part, maybe really few times. It's kind of like when they were building trains across the country, they were supposed to meet somewhere. Sometimes they didn't. Every now and then I'll get to the end and logic dictates a turn or a change. It doesn't happen too often because you kind of write with that destination in your mind. You got to get there. So, you can weave a story way out to the left as long as there's a way to bring it back into the center line that's heading towards that ending. A couple times I've actually written the endings first because they became so clear in my imagination. I didn't want to forget some of the details I came up with, so I would write the ending. And when I've gotten there, I didn't have to change too much, so that was good.
Good. Well, I think it's safe to assume many of the folks watching this are also fans of the Bosch TV show on Amazon, which just started streaming its final season. I know I'm a fan, but it also took me a while to accept Titus Welliver as the actor who plays Bosch because he didn't fit the image of the detective I had in my head. I saw him as someone older and, well, maybe a little scruffier. So has that ever been an issue for you in the TV shows or movies made from your books?
No, not really. With Titus, I basically had a very big hand in picking him. When we were making the show, Bosch was already retired from the police department.
Right.
And so we knew we had to go with someone younger. And we also hoped for several seasons. You never know what's going to happen. You might get canceled after one episode. But we were hoping for several episodes. So we had to come up with someone who had an appropriate age that would not strain credulity that he, in 7 or 8 years, he's still a detective. So that was one of the issues. So the guy in the books I think he's about 15 years older than Bosch, maybe 12 than the Bosch and the TV shows. And so they're quite different, I think. The characters, one is obviously wiser and further down the road. I agree with you. Titus doesn't look like the guy I've been imagining since I started writing Bosch in 1988. But I always say he looks like him on the inside because Titus has this ability to project with his facial expression and his eyes what's going on inside, and that there's damage and that there's baggage. And that was the key thing. I was not a TV guy. I was a book writer, but I hooked up with a showrunner who already knew the books. I already knew him. And I knew he wanted to be as loyal to the character and the books as he possibly could. But he said, the books are all interior. You're riding inside Bosch's head, and we don't do that on TV. We don't know what's going on in his head. So we got to find the actor who can project that. And Titus, right before we cast him, he had played a role, like a guest starring role on a TV show, where he was a military vet who had PTSD. And he didn't go around saying I have PTSD. You could just tell he had it. You could just tell by the haunted eyes and things like that. And so we saw that, or I saw that, and brought it to the group that was involved in casting the character, and we all agreed. And it took us a while to get him. He was making a movie in China when we were trying to cast this, and so we waited almost a month for him to be able to come back and talk to us and do an audition. And he basically got the job on the spot when he did that.
Well, I came to really like him as the character, and now when I read your books, he's who I see as Bosch. So he's somebody who
well,
really...
it's interesting. He hasn't done that with me yet, because I guess I'm entrenched in the guy I created back in 1988, and I've been thinking about for at least 20 some years before Titus came into the picture. But he also does the audio books, and I love his voice. So in an odd way, I still see the old guy, but I hear Titus. And it's interesting that you say you now see him, because we're talking about this is the Festival of Books. We're talking really about the reading experience, and it's a sacred thing that people take these words and create images. And then, and I never put a lot of descriptions of Bosch in the books, because I write the way I read. I like to create in my head.
Right.
And so I just kind of gave the outlines of what this guy looks like. And, so for 20 years, I'd said, do it yourself, build your own Bosch. And then we totally play with that sacred connection by saying, oh, by the way, here's a TV show, and this is exactly what he looks like.
Right.
And so I respect people who there's a lot of people who won't watch the show. I guess they're waiting for me to stop writing about Bosch, which hopefully won't be for a while. But,
right.
But I get that kind of anecdotal feedback. I can't watch the show because I got Harry Bosch in my head. It's not this guy I've seen pictures of. And, and I always say, well, look, they're different. They're kind of different. They're moving on different planes. We had to update stories from the 90s.
Right.
And things change, and give it a shot. But I think you'll find the DNA is the same.
Right.
And, and I think the center of the books, at least in this century, has been about Bosch and his daughter. And I think we captured that so perfectly on this TV show. I just kind of feel that the people who don't want to watch the show because they have their own Bosch in their head and their hearts, I think they're missing out on something that could be pretty good for them to see.
Right. Well, I guess the silver lining for them, though, is that there's more Harry Bosch coming, and there will be for a number of years. So that's great. And Michael, we're running out of time here. I very much appreciate you taking the time to chat with us, and I want to thank the viewers for tuning in as well. And the audience, we encourage you to purchase Michael's books and the other ones from the festival from our indie bookseller partners. Also, please consider supporting the San Diego Council on Literacy, and continue to watch the full program of author panels, demonstrations, and other entertainment we have going on online. So thanks again for watching. Michael, thank you so much for your time and for your work.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Right. Take care.